Here we are. So we're looking at a panel on the interior arch of the Arch of Titus. And the title of this panel is called The Spoils of Jerusalem. So I don't want you to get confused. It's still the Arch of Titus, but we're looking at the specific panel called The Spoils of Jerusalem inside of the Arch of Titus. And what we see here are Roman soldiers carrying off the treasures of Jerusalem. Do you recognize this one here? Do you know what that is? It's a menorah. It's a sacred lamp, a seven-branched candelabra that would have been used in the temple. The menorah was placed in the sanctuary of the temple and was cleaned out every morning and replaced and put fresh oil in the cups every evening. And here we see it being torn out of the temple and carted away. Now, the menorah and other treasures would have been chopped up, hacked into pieces, and sold for their raw materials of gold and silver and jewels, and therefore money for feeding the rest of the empire. I mean, feeding the luxury goods markets of the Roman Empire. And this again was seen as a triumph for Titus. This is significant, and we'll come back to it in a few weeks when we talk about the destruction of the second temple. It's located in the middle, or in the city of Jerusalem, on a raised platform that is referred to as the Temple Mount. And this was the second temple that had been built there. We'll talk about what happened to the first temple. We'll talk about what happens after Titus destroys the second temple. But I just want to lay this seed of context here with Titus so that when we return to it in a few weeks, you have a fuller understanding of the richness of art and history. But returning now to Titus and the arch. So we were looking at this side of the Arch of Titus. This side had the plunders of Jerusalem. On this side is the second panel, and it is simply titled The Triumph of Titus. And in this, we see the same procession out of Jerusalem. They're going in the same direction as the opposite side, remember? So here, they're traveling to our right, and then if we're going to flip around, and we're looking at this panel, they're continuing in the same direction. So we are supposed to be reading this as two scenes, or two moments of the same, two scenes of the same moment. And standing in the middle, it's as if we're standing in the middle of this triumph of Titus. We're one of the soldiers bringing the loot to benefit the rest of the empire. And there's Titus himself right there. He's in this chariot pulled by 4 horses, and we see the spears of many of his soldiers behind him. So we can see that he's surrounded by these celebratory shouts and cheers and whoops and hollers of the soldiers. And he stands at the front of his chariot. Behind him is a woman with wings with an outstretched hand. Who is that? You know who that is? You're right. It's Victory. It's Nike. I mean, the Greeks called her Nike. The Romans call her Victory. And here, if there's any question if Titus was victorious in his plundering of Jerusalem, she's bringing the laurel to put on his head, this way, and placing that with her beautiful wings behind her. We know that he was victorious. The state of this arch it's really in bad shape, right? A lot of the faces are missing because, take away somebody's power by taking away their face. And after the fall of the empire and worship of the emperors was seen as illegal, these faces are all going to be chopped off. These deep insets of like pits in the panels that you see here and you see in this one, those are from people's attempts to take out the panels, to loot the panels. I know. you can see more here. A lot of the panels were successfully removed, were looted. So that's evidence of ancient looting. The last part of the Arch of Titus I want us to look at is up on top. So we have our arch. We have Jerusalem on this side. We have Titus on this side. And then up above, we have this square that is titled, you see that there? Apotheosis of Titus. So this is our third artwork within the Arch of Titus. Apotheosis of Titus, what does this even mean, Miss Cortez? The apotheosis of Titus is speaking to his godly status. Here's a vocab term, apotheosis. Apotheosis is the elevation of someone to divine or godly status. And this here is a zoom in of this square right there. What we see is Titus, and Titus is being lifted up to the heavens on the wings of an eagle. Now, eagles have many symbolic connections in the Roman world. The Roman army's forces, the Roman army is symbolized by an eagle with outstretched wings. So we could think of that as an eagle being the Roman army. Makes sense. He was a successful general. But also, the king of the gods, Jupiter, the Greeks would call him Zeus, is symbolized as an eagle. And so we can think of this as Jupiter, king of the gods, taking Titus up to the heavens to become a god. And then surrounding that, we see these evergreen boughs. Remember boughs of evergreen like we saw in the Areopagus? So evergreen trees, they never die. They're evergreen. These boughs of evergreen mean eternal life. So we have Titus rising up on the back of Jupiter to become a god. And then think about the title of the Arch of Titus. The title, or the inscription on top, was saying we dedicate this to the divine Titus. And then right there we see the moment of Titus rising up with the king of the gods carrying him, and then that eternal life of those green boughs around. So much symbolism going on, right? Yes. And as I said, we will only be looking at we're looking at this arch in detail, but there are plenty and many throughout the entire empire. These are symbolic ways of putting the emperor's presence down and reminding you of how great they are. We're going to look at one more in this class. I'm thinking of one more arch, but I want you to be familiar with this concept of a triumphal arch is speaking to the triumphs of a specific person. Here, it's Titus. Now, we'll finish with the Arch of Titus and what happened to Domitian. I hate to tell you this, but you asked, right? I heard you. You asked, what happened to Domitian? Well, he had a good run as emperor, but he never really fully got the support of his enemies. And he was assassinated. He was assassinated by one of his own guardsmen. He put up a pretty good fight. The guardsmen came at him from behind with a knife, and they wrestled, and the guardsman died of his injuries, and Domitian died of his injuries. But Domitian was assassinated by one of his own guards. That then brings civil war, social unrest, chaos. So we have an emperor die or assassinated, eruption of civil war. What's going to happen next? You'll find out next week when we look at the height of the Roman Empire.